You know, this channel exists to tell you the truth, to take the things that are happening that you see on television or that you read in the newspaper on social media, and we'll tell you the real, no kidding about what's going on underneath, what they don't tell you on the mainstream media, or what they do tell you, we'll tell you how it's not exactly that way. Very oftentimes we'll do it by showing you a clip of some news report or something somebody says, a soundbite here and there. We're going to do something a little bit different today. We're going to try a new method here to really bring some light onto what's going on and what people see on television. Yesterday on Fox News Sunday, there was Senator Richard Blumenthal and Lindsey Graham were on to talk about this, just passed bill in the House of Representatives to bringing $61 billion to Ukraine. And the Fox News host was going to say, hey, JD Vance has said this, raised a couple of issues that are contrary to what you guys are saying. And she was kind of asking them some of those questions that goes through and says, well, he says this, and then they said other things. Now, to the host credit, she tried to call him out on a few things a few times, but because they're very powerful, overpowering personalities, especially Lindsey Graham, he pushed right past a lot of that and blocked her off, and then started saying a bunch of other things, to kind of support his position, not really giving her a chance to come back because she's got very limited time. And so she can't, camp on any one thing here because she's got to get the rest of this things in. We're not limited that way. So we're going to show you a good portion of that interview, at least the first 5 minutes of it that had to do with the Ukraine part here. And we're going to start deploying it, and then we're going to push pause, and then we're going to tell you what's really going on. And what you're going to see on this is just, I would say it's remarkable. It's amazing. But if you've been watching our channel for any time, it's not remarkable or amazing that they say all kinds of untrue things, that they're blatantly saying, ignoring other categories of truths, or that they're just blindly going down a path of what they wish were true instead of what is. This one is really going to highlight that. So you can see the start to finish just how much nonsense people are saying on mainstream news media today. And this is what passes because a lot of people don't have access to this channel. And when they hear them say these things and they don't hear the host come back and challenge them on it, many of them are going to be understandably going, okay, well, I guess they must be right because she didn't say anything after that. Let's delve into it right now. So first of all, here's at the beginning of that segment where they're talking about Ukraine.
Know that you have traveled to Ukraine together. So let's talk about what's going on there, because now you have this package coming back to the Senate. Your fellow colleague, Republican JD Vance, is he's got some questions about this. He says in a piece in the New York Times that the math doesn't add up. He says Ukraine needs more soldiers than it can field, even with draconian conscription policies, and it needs more materiel than the United States can provide. The sooner Americans confront this truth, the sooner we can fix this mess and broker for peace. He says, even with us ramping up our industrial production here, we're not getting a fraction of what Ukraine says it needs. So why prolong this?
I think that pessimism underestimates America. We're the strongest, greatest country in the history of the world. We can produce the kind of artillery shells, the long-range artillery, the ATACMs that are necessary, the air defense, Patriot systems. Iran needs many more of them to protect its cities. And we also can enforce sanctions and seize and sell Russian assets to provide more resources to Ukraine. So we're building, and this measure, strongly bipartisan, I think sends a message to the world. The foreign minister of Lithuania yesterday said, "Good to have you back, America." I think America is back on offense, and this sign that we can come together in a bipartisan way for our national security and send a message to Vladimir Putin, to Xi, to the dictators of the world. Too soon to be popping your champagne corks. America is going to defend democracy.
So Senator Vance,
okay,
though,
hold on right there, Gary. So Blumenthal is going to be a little bit different than Graham in some respects, but he's fallen in this classic thing that so many politicians do of just ignore what you don't want to be true. Just say that it's not. No, it's not a capacity issue. She just showed JD Vance told it's a math issue. It's a capacity issue. And he's like, yeah, no, it's not, because, and he repeated what you've seen us show a lot of times with President Biden, we're the greatest country in the history of the world. He says the same thing here. Blumenthal does. We're the greatest country, so we don't have constraints because we're great. And we're going to defend democracy. And he uses all these big, flowery, emotional terms. not talking about the substance, not talking about what J.D. Vance specifically looked at, specifically what he asked about. Fortunately for you, we are, because despite what he says, it is a capacity issue. It doesn't matter how much money that you may pass here when you can't produce enough. And this is what, according to Defense One, which published just not long ago, this is according to the U.S. Government. Here's those figures. Gary, if you can throw that headline up there. This is what the U.S. was hoping to produce in capacity to be able to do. And he said U.S. production of 155 millimeter shells raised from 28,000 per month last October, the most recent month for which they had at that time, the number to roughly 37,000 this current month. And they hope to get up to 60,000 in October 24. And then they said they hope to, in 2025, get up to 75,000, and maybe even April of 2025 to October, then around 100,000. So that's what they hope to get up to. Now, for context here, when they're saying they want to get underneath some of these things, that means the capacity to make them. That assumes an unlimited amount of money. That's not a problem. There are constraints in how fast you can ramp that up. It's not as though if you double the amount of money, you're going to double the amount of artillery shells. It doesn't work that way. You have to have a factory. You have to have an assembly line. You have to have all the resources that go into it. You have to have the trained workforce. You have to have all of this stuff that works together so that it can physically produce. And then you have, enough materials to package it together, to ship it out, to all those kind of things. Every bit of that has to work. All of that takes time. You can't just build a factory out of nothing. You can't just say, take instead of, there's 2 lines here, make 4. So let's double it, make 6, make 8, so we can make even more. All of those things take a great deal of money that the company has to invest, and then they have to get it. Then they have to hire people. They have to train them. That's the reason you see that ramp up period going all the way to 2025. Here's what Graham's not telling you about, which J.D. Vance has, by the way. That figure that they want to get to in about a year and a half from now, 100,000 per month is what they want to be making, is about 40% of what Russia is making today. We're hoping at the end of fiscal 2025 to be making 100,000 shells per month. We're hoping. Russia is making about 250,000 shells per month right now. Now, if anybody thinks that that's this finite figure and they're going to stop there, they're not. They're continuing to ramp up their own because they're looking at this as a long-term process. See, here's a big deal that Russia is different than what the entire West is, and this is going to come back up later in this interview. This is an existential fight for them. They are in the fight for their lives. They are not just fighting Ukraine, they're fighting the cumulative West. So they're withholding nothing. They're ramping up everything. They are full on like we did during World War II, where our literal life is on the line here. And so everything has been basically sidelined and subordinated to supporting the war effort. That's what Russia is doing right now, as these images are showing you right now. This is some of their bombs that they're making, these new categories of bombs, FABs, which we may discuss later. That's not happening in the West because we're not at war. The Ukraine side is, but we're not at war. So we're not basically telling the industry, here's what you're going to do, like a law. We're saying, hey, if y'all want to make some money, this would be good. But see, that leaves it up to each individual company to be able to say, yeah, we're going to do this because we don't want to invest enough to make these 2 lines to 4 or 6 or 8 to get something that the war may be over in a year. Before we even get the factory built, the thing could be over. Now then we've invested all this money and time and we can't use it. And then we have to start paring back down. So a company in America is not going to be quick to jump into that if they aren't very sure that they can get money back on the return on their investment. And you see, that's one of the reasons why it's for the slow go here. Some of the other things he says in there, well, you're talking about the greatest country in the world, but he makes this comment, we're back on the offense. We are moving forward and we're on the offense and we're going to seek to have Russia's defeat. You realize that, number one, that's just a bunch of rhetoric and it doesn't mean anything in reality. But what it does do helps out Vladimir Putin a lot because he builds his national framework on telling their people, with propaganda, that this is not Russia versus Ukraine. This is Russia versus the entire West. And they tell their people that all the time. They're saying, that's why you have to support us. That's why you have to support me. That's why you have to take these, cuts in services and whatnot so that we can afford to go after the military. When they hear U.S. Congress people saying this kind of stuff, which confirms what Putin's telling them. Can you believe that? We're actually helping the propaganda for Russia by making these kinds of claims. We're on the move. We're on the offense. Well, offense against who? Against Russia. So they're validating the propaganda. Unbelievable. All right, Gary, continue on with that.
When it comes to Patriot missiles, 155 millimeter shells. He talks about all these things and says, even if we ramp up to the goals that we have for next year, we're not even going to get to like a third of what Ukraine says they need. This morning, you got the Russian Foreign Ministry saying out there it's going to be a fiasco. It's turning into Vietnam, and that we're funding something that's just going to lead to more lost lives.
Well, if you want American military members to stay out of the fight with Russia, help Ukraine. If they go into a NATO nation, Russia, we're in a fight. So with all due respect to Senator Vance, he's wrong. We were told within 4 days Kyiv would fall.
But is he wrong about the math?
Yeah,
is he wrong about the production?
He's wrong about the whole concept that we can't deal with multiple problems. In World War II, we fought the Germans.
Okay, yeah. He's wrong again. And actually, let's let JD Vance speak a little bit for himself, because here he was on CNN talking about another one of the things that Graham won't even address, and that is, where's all this going again? Check this out.
From the perspective of the United States of America, and I represent, I believe, the majority of American public opinion, even though I don't represent the majority of opinion of senators who come to Munich, is that there's no clear endpoint. And fundamentally, the limiting factors for American support of Ukraine, it's not money, it's munitions. America, and this is true, by the way, of Europe too, we don't make enough munitions to support a war in Eastern Europe, a war in the Middle East, and potentially contingency in East Asia. So the United States is fundamentally limited.
And then he also asked on a different interview on CNN, he said, and where's this going?
On the Ukraine question in particular, everybody with a brain in their head, Jake, knows that this was always going to end in negotiation. The idea that Ukraine was going to throw Russia back to the 1991 borders was preposterous. Nobody actually believed it. So what we're saying to the president and really to the entire world is, you need to articulate what the ambition is. What is $61 billion going to accomplish that $100 billion hasn't? We have to remember, Jake, Ukraine is functionally destroyed as a country. The average age of a soldier in the Ukrainian army right now is 43. That's tragic. That's older than me. I'm 39. If this thing goes on a little bit longer, the average age of a Ukrainian soldier is going to be older than you. And then a year later, it could be Wolf Blitzer.
So, as I already chronicled to you there, it is a limitation on the capacity issue, no matter how much money you have. But then again, where are you going? Now, Lindsey Graham just said there, just before we paused it, that, oh, you know what? We want to keep American troops out. We don't want American boys to be going and fighting because we want to keep it in Ukraine. But where are you trying to go? Are you trying to get the physical defeat of Russia? And you think that you're going to get that with the Ukrainian people? Or, as J.D. Vance implied there, anyone with a brain in their head would know that this is going to end up in some kind of negotiated settlement. So then what is Lindsey Graham's path toward providing this money to get to a negotiated settlement? Or is he even thinking about that? And the evidence implies he's not even thinking about that. He just has this categorical that he wants to have Putin lose, doesn't know how that would work, doesn't know how this money will contribute toward that, or whether it even has a role in that. He has no idea, because he just loves to talk in flowery language, which continued on like this.
The Germans and the Japanese. We have an industrial base that needs to be retooled. But the Ukrainian military, with our help, has killed about 50% of the combat power of the Russians.
Okay, I'll stop it right there.
This is the year.
Okay, first of all, two things there. First of all, he said, we've done this before. We can walk and chew gum at the same time. We fought the damn Germans and we fought the Japanese World War II. We can sure do this. Okay, point of clarification. We're not at war with Russia. So, yeah, in World War II, we did all that because we did then what Russia's doing now, because it was in an existential fight and it ordered people to, to retool their industry. It was a command in economy, and their lives were dependent on it, so that they did whatever it took to get all these things up. And you see, it took them about a year and a half of once a decision was made before they're starting to really crank things off the assembly line like they're doing right now. That's not the case in America. We still have a peacetime economy because we're at peace. Well, relatively speaking, we're not at war with anybody. Even though we're supporting somebody's, we're not at war with anybody. So our economy is not on a wartime economy. So he's trying to say, because we did this wartime economy in the past, we can do this now without a wartime economy. So you see, those things just can't work together. But then he also in there adds in, he says that 50% of the combat power of Russia has been destroyed. So he's like, yeah, man, this is a great deal. We've already got this far. Only that's not true. Now, there has been obviously a significant amount of loss of the Russian forces from when they started. They suffered lots of casualties, no doubt. But we had General Cavoli before the U.S. Congress just a couple of weeks ago. Here, if you can throw that up there, he said Russian military has replaced battlefield losses far faster than expected. And when you went on in that testimony there, he says that they have effectively replaced everything that they had lost. So their current combat power, no matter how much they lost in tanks, personnel, armored personnel carriers, weapons, ammunition, all those things that they certainly have lost, they've replaced it. And now then it's accelerating. It's growing. They have more people. They have more trained people. They have more weapons. And here's another thing that Lindsey Graham doesn't even talk about. And this is vital. Because we have given our Abrams tanks, Stryker combat vehicles, Bradley fighting vehicles, Stingers, Javelins, our Patriot air defense systems, HIMARS systems, all of these things we've given to Ukraine to fight Russia. Guess what they're doing, folks? They're learning how to defeat that stuff. Their electronic warfare is learning how to make our HIMARS missiles go off course, how to make drones go off course, how to make other bombs that we fired not be effective, how to defeat our armored vehicles. They understand how they work. They've captured many of them intact. So our national security is now weaker than it was when this war started. Did you realize that? Our efforts like this, supported by people, by Lindsey Graham, has made America weaker than it was before, because now then our adversary knows how to defeat our stuff better. Even aside from tactics, they know how to defeat our technology better because they're getting active practice at doing so. That's one of the bigger consequences of this. And the longer this goes, the more they're going to know our stuff and the less capable we're going to be, because we don't have the advantage of doing the same thing to the Russian side. We can watch it from a distance, and I'm sure we are, but until you actually engage in it and fight in it, it's a lot more difficult than you may think, especially for us to get it secondhand that we're trying to get from Ukraine, whereas Russia, it's their lifeblood, so they're on it. That's the issue with that. So he's wrong again, and he's leaving out again something that really is important to America. It continues.
More. They're going to have more weapons, but we also want them to have new weapons, ATACMs, to knock the bridge down between Crimea and Russia. They're going to have F-16s.
Oh, yeah. Stop again.
Sorry.
Yeah, sorry about that, Gary. Man, you're going to wear out your finger on that. ATACMs and F-16s. Every time there's something new come in, everybody always says it's going to be a game changer. The HIMARS system was going to be a game changer. The Patriots were going to be a game changer. The Challenger tanks from UK, the Leopards from Germany, the Abrams from America, all those were going to be a game changer. The Bradleys, none of it was a game changer. So now then the next thing it's going to be is the ATACMs, which is a long-range missile, if you don't know what all that stands for, and the F-16s, because that's really cool. That's a really cool aircraft. We have them, so that's going to be a game changer too. First of all, in the ATACMs, they already have, the Ukraine side, long-range missiles, the Storm Shadow. And it has some success. It has had a couple of really important successes here and there. They struck some big targets, and it's really hurt the Russians in several places. But that doesn't change anything. and you don't have to go any further than to see the other side of this equation. The Russians have had long-range missiles from the outset, and they have, since probably October of 2022, had a methodical process of firing long-range weapons all throughout the Ukrainian country, all the way to the western border, everywhere in between, the front line, the just off the front line, and everywhere in between, all the way to the border. And you see that has not brought Ukraine to its knees. They still continue to operate. And that is almost nonstop against where they have a very small amount of air defense. So most of these missiles and drones, they get through it. It's routinely destroying the energy system, et cetera. And yet still all of that does not keep Ukraine from fighting. So why does anyone think that a handful of ATACMS missiles, long range, for the Ukraine side will do what thousands upon thousands of routinely fired missiles from the Russian side have not brought the Ukraine side to its knees? That's not how war works. Lindsey Graham doesn't know that's not how war works, but he thinks that the cool F-16s, that's going to help too. But General Milley, when he was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff last year, addressed this issue and should put that to rest.
If you look at F-16s, 10 F-16s, $1 billion. You add the sustainment cost, another $1 billion. So you're talking about $2 billion for 10 aircraft. The Russians have 1,000 fourth and fifth generation fighters. So if you're going to contest Russia in the air, you're going to need a substantial amount of fourth and fifth generation fighters.
Russians do over 1,000 fourth and fifth generation fighters. Ukraine has, I don't know how many they may have still. They had, I think, around 80 or so when the war started. They've certainly lost a lot of those, and they basically quit flying them. You don't even hear reports about it anymore. But now here comes the F-16s, and literally any month those things could come up. I think July is the target number when those things are going to start showing up. But here's what Lindsey Graham's not telling you, nor hardly anybody else in the West. Right now, somewhere around, I think 8 are expected to be in before the end of the summer, maybe 12 to 16 by the end of the year. And that's a combination of having the pilots being able to operate them and having the airframes and all the supplies and necessary crew members to keep the things in the air. So it's a literal handful. And just like a handful of Abrams tanks, 1 battalion's worth, made zero difference on the ground, all of the Challengers, the Leopards, all the other tanks that were given had no impact at all on Ukraine's offensive last summer. These will also not have any impact in the course of the war. There's just too few of them. They're not trained well enough for them. They'll be able to fly them, but they are not going to be able to operate them the way Western armies would, the way the U.S. would, because they also don't have the system that we have. They may not even be able to fly them from their Air Force because they have to have specific types of runway surfaces which Russia can keep interdicting and blowing up, which will keep preventing them from flying, even the few that there are. Bottom line is it will not have any impact, but Lindsey Graham either doesn't know or doesn't care because all he wants to do is keep the gravy train flowing and the money rolling, irrespective of where this is going. He continues on.
Give up on Ukraine makes the world safer. If you pull the plug on Ukraine because you don't have enough capability, there goes Taiwan. Ukrainians are fighting like tigers. This aid package has a loan component to it. This would not have passed without Donald Trump. I want to thank the House Speaker and Hakeem Jeffries working together in a bipartisan fashion to give weapons to Ukraine to fight a fight that matters to us. And President Trump has created a loan component to this package. It gives us leverage down the road. So this idea that we can't help Ukraine.
Okay, so here again, he's just talking about he's trying to make everybody happy, so they keep giving him more money. So he tried to get agree with President Trump that instead of just giving it to him, let's make it a loan. Well, first of all, that's not true because the loan has a clause for a forgiveness, meaning it's never going to be repaid. Even if they didn't have it, it's never going to be replaced. They just don't have the capacity for the foreseeable future, many, many years into the future before there's even the possibility of them making enough money to handle their own, domestic needs and be able to pay it back. That's just fiction, and it's not going to happen. But the other thing is that no one's saying that we should give up on Ukraine. That's going to make the world safe. Nobody's saying that. J.D. Vance isn't saying that. Daniel Davis Deep Dive isn't saying that. John Mearsheimer, Doug McGregor, et al., all the people who know what they're talking about No one's saying that's going to make the world safer. What we are very much saying, though, is that it is time to acknowledge ground truth, reality, and pursue a negotiated settlement under the best terms available, because to ignore the reality and to keep with the fiction, like what you see Lindsey Graham and Senator Blumenthal talking about here, is going to cost even more. It's going to cost more Ukrainian lives. It's going to cost more Ukrainian territory, and it's going to keep alive the possibility that the war expands beyond through either miscalculation or error or some other kind of crazy thing like sending Western troops into Western Ukraine, for example. Every day that the war goes on, it increases the possibility of this thing going out of control. Second thing is there, he said, you can just write off Taiwan if you write off Ukraine. I keep hearing that. I'm like, just no, stop right now. Stop with the nonsense. China is going to make its decision on what it does or doesn't do based on the conditions that exist in the Indo-Pacific. They won't have anything to do. They're paying attention. They're watching, but they're not going to make a decision on what the West does or doesn't do in the Ukraine, because they can see, they can calculate, they can count. They also know math. Don't know if you're aware of that. And so they can see, well, it's kind of dumb to keep trying to pursue something that can't be succeeded over there. And whether they do or whether they don't, whether the U.S. makes a dumb decision or whether they make a wise decision and cut off the bleeding, is not going to impact what they do in the Indo-Pacific. They're going to make their decision based on an analysis of the balance of power there, how much they perceive that it would cost them to use force, or how much it would cost them, whether politically, diplomatically, or otherwise, to not go there, to continue to wait their time and bide their time. All those things are based on what's happening on the ground, what things look like in Taiwan, their own military forces, what they perceive that the U.S. or our allies may do in response. Those are all of the basket of things they will calculate. This over here it's incidental and has no impact. It's not as though that all of these factors come out to X or however they calculate it, and that but if I see that Ukraine falls over here, okay, great, now I'll jump in here. That's a sophomoric way to look at things. It's embarrassing that people like Lindsey Graham and others actually want to convince people that that's how it would be, because it's like they don't even understand how combat power is derived. They don't understand the calculations and the mental processes that nations use, whether they go to war or peace or seek diplomatic or economic measures. It's like they don't even know how that works. And so they have this really simplistic, like elementary school understanding of foreign policy, and then they make these claims with conviction. And that by itself is troubling. Continue on, please.
Israel and Taiwan at the same time. I reject that. I reject it totally.
Okay, well, let me.
And he's wrong on the numbers also, because the Defense Production Act, which we used in the Korean War, can convert civilian production capacity to produce the artillery, the vehicles, all of the stuff that the industrial base can and will produce if it's given the right demand signal. And we know on the Armed Services Committee where I serve that a consistent demand signal is necessary to produce the kind of investments that is necessary for those numbers to change.
Okay, well, we're not
One
there.
last thing.
This will not happen.
Thank God that our parents.
Stop there, Gary. So again, he matter-of-factly, Senator Blumenthal just tries to completely change the nature of everything that they've been saying. All the fundamentals that the host tries to bring up by saying it is a capacity issue, it is a numbers issue, tries to ignore all that and just says, well, Vance's math is wrong because he's not taking the fact that we can basically, as a government, order civilian people to switch their manufacturing to a wartime basis. Now that power does exist and it can be used, but only if you're at wartime. Nobody in America, whether civilian or business people, are going to support the government ordering somebody to change their capacity to what they make and how they do industrial capacity to produce wartime goods. No one's going to do that. It doesn't exist because no one would support it. Not even Congress wouldn't support it. They wouldn't get this bill passed no matter what those two senators may want there. We're not at war, so that capacity doesn't exist. Ergo, the math still applies. So yes, unless we're on a full war footing because we're at war with somebody, then all of those constraints that J.D. Vance talked about are very much at play, and they're very real. So, meaning the fiction that these guys, in the absence of a full war, will not work. $60 billion is a drop in the bucket, as there was already somewhere around $200 billion that was used up through the summer of 2023, which resulted in no gains whatsoever, broke the Ukrainian teeth on their offensive, trying to go into Russia, which I pointed out months before would have that exact cause, because I understand how combat power is derived. I understand how combat is conducted at the tactical, operational, and strategic levels, and it was self-evident that it was going to fail. And now then they're wanting to ignore all of those facts, all of that physical evidence, and they want to repeat it. And somehow they want you to believe that basically a third of what was given before, after catastrophic losses on the Ukrainian side, that somehow it's going to work in the future. And folks, it's just not going to. I think we got one more play here. Gary, roll the last part of that.
Parents and grandparents didn't have that attitude in World War II. Hey, we can only fight one thing at a time.
He's not
Nobody's
saying that.
dying
What
in
he's
Ukraine.
saying is that that Ukraine doesn't have the manpower it needs,
That-
and that
that is
and that
garbage.
and that our
Go. I just got
factories-
back. I was there 2 weeks ago. They changed their conscription laws. They've got all the manpower they need. They need weapons. Is what they don't have is weapons.
Okay, Gary,
They
stop one more time there.
added-
Now, this is also very important, because Ukraine did just change their conscription law, and they're projecting that they're going to add another 500,000 people. And let me just emphatically again make very clear, it's an issue of manpower, not money, not machines. Having enough cash, having enough weapons, ammunition, all that stuff is one part of the component. But without a trained manpower pool, it won't matter how much you get. And right now, because Ukraine has lost almost all of the trained troops they had prior to this war started, and they have lost the majority of those that were trained, even what happened up through the summer of last year's offensive that the Ukraine side had. Now that they are not recruiting enough people, they're not mobilizing enough people to offset the losses that are happening. So they're progressively getting weaker. And here's the practical implications of what that means. That means that they don't get the chance to train people out of contact so that they have a chance to employ them with some level of training. They're having to throw them immediately into the gap. So Lindsey Graham went to Ukraine, and he thinks that he understands what's going on because he saw some things on the ground, and he was told a lot of things by Volodymyr Zelensky. And he thinks, Graham does, if you see a Ukraine man and he's wearing a uniform, that's a trained soldier. We just need to get a weapon in his hand, and that'll change everything. And folks, it's not. That's one of the things I screamed about before this summer offensive. It's not enough to even give a few months of training to somebody and then think they can do complex tasks in a modern battlefield. It doesn't work that way. It never has, and it's not going to now. And it's even worse for Ukraine now, because you're literally just throwing guys off the street, putting a uniform in them, a rifle in their hand, and asking them to do complex tasks that they don't know how to do, and they're definitely not motivated as they were earlier in this war to do them. You're sending people to certain death by doing this, because Russian troops, they're now much larger than they were before. They did train large numbers of troops out of contact. They mobilized a bunch in the fall of 2022, and they also threw them in the gaps with hardly any training to stem the tide and to stop the bleeding, so to speak. And then they went for a full year on the defensive, But what few in America is aware of is that a lot of those hundreds of thousands of troops, while that one group was on the line defending, they had other people training out of contact on how to be good soldiers, how to be good at the unit level, how to be good at the larger unit level, so that they conduct operations. And they would then put trained men and trained leaders at various levels so that the new people came in and they had the benefit of the experience of the others. Now they're starting to employ some of those while they still get new people. And when they hire new people, when they mobilize, or rather they recruit, because they're still recruiting around 30 to 40,000 per month, because they have some incredible financial incentives, they're also training out of combat. They're not just throwing them into the line. So that means by the time Russian soldiers get to the line, they are now relatively well trained in comparison to the other side. And that everything's about the relative comparison between the two. Ukraine can't reverse this. This is a dynamic that can't be reversed. Russia has 5 times millions more military age males from which to draw. They'll never run out in the course of this war. Ukraine is already starting to have, or already has, not starting to, they have fewer people coming in than they're losing each month. So their collective strength is weakening, and their level of training and knowledge is going down as well, because they're constantly throwing back people in who aren't trained. Under those conditions, you cannot conduct complex modern warfare to where you can ever even hope to unseat Russia. Because remember, all those lines of defenses that were never penetrated in the 2023 offensive have been increased even stronger since then. But of course, Russia's still on the offense. Ukraine is trying to build lines of defense now, belatedly, in their side, and it's just not working very much. So every way you want to look, through everything he has said, it's just complete nonsense. And I'm just telling you here, these are the facts that I've shown you, many of the facts, and from my personal combat experience that I've seen, and from my training period of time, I can tell you these are enduring, sometimes centuries old lessons that are self-evident to anyone who's bothered to listen to them. We have to avoid going after these emotional kinds of pleas, these patriotic claims, and this reflexive hatred of Russia, to continue to fund something that can't be won, to continue to let people pay for the price on the Ukraine side in this hope and this unfounded fiction that somehow things are going to be different in the future instead of everything we've seen in the past. That's where we are right now. And this is a little bit longer than some of the episodes we have, especially on a certain area like that. But I want to show you how comprehensively and totality what you're being told is nonsense, and it does not comport with verifiable evidence on the ground, with our own production levels, with Russian production levels, things that could be counted. And then I can also tell you, as other people have who have experience fighting, why those things aren't going to work, and why things work out the way they do, and why the likelihood is that at some point, possibly even before the summer is out, the Ukraine army could finally buckle and break. And because Russia has more troops, they could literally flood people into the interior of the country where there is no defenses at all. And then we're in a whole different ballpark right here. Let's don't wait to that point. Let's don't get to there before we finally start doing what's right. Let's stop listening to people like Lindsey Graham, start listening to people like J.D. Vance and Doug McGregor, John Mearsheimer, Matt Ho, several other people, Jacques Beau, that we've had on here plenty of times. Listen to the people who know what they're talking about, who have combat experience, or like John Mearsheimer does. Well, he actually had military experience himself, in addition to decades of accurate calls about how this stuff's going to work out, and an understanding of how international relations work. Listen to those people who have a good track record instead of people like this. Thank you for listening today. We really appreciate it. And we will see you tomorrow. And by the way, speaking of John Mearsheimer and Doug McGregor, two former veterans and guys with great track records, we're going to have both of them on our show live tomorrow, one at 1 and one at 3 p.m. tomorrow. Do not miss that. Put it on your calendars right now, because it's going to be awesome stuff. Thanks, and we'll see you tomorrow on Daniel Davis Deep Dive.